January 1944. Over the frozen skies of western Germany. The clouds hang low, streaked with contrails like chalk lines across a gray canvas. Below them, fields lie dead and white, dotted with the black skeletons of burned-out villages. High above, a formation of silver American bombers rumbles eastward, their engines trembling through the thin winter air. The escorts beside them are strange-looking planes, long-nosed, elegant, with tails unlike anything the Germans have seen before. If you're enjoying this journey through history, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more WW2 stories, and tell us in the comments which country or city you're watching from. Inside a Luftwaffe command post near Münster, laughter echoes. German pilots, veterans of years in the sky, joke about these new toothpick fighters. Too light, they say. Too pretty to fight. To them, the American Mustang looks fragile, a toy compared to their rugged Messerschmitt Bf-109s. But by the end of that winter, no one in Germany would be laughing, because the Mustang was about to change the air war and the fate of the Reich itself. When the Second World War erupted in 1939, Germany's skies were already a fortress. The Luftwaffe was the sharpest blade in Hitler's arsenal, tested, seasoned, and ruthlessly efficient. From the blitzkrieg over Poland to the burning skies of France, its pilots had carved a reputation of invincibility. Their Messerschmitt Bf-109s, fast, nimble, and battle-proven, ruled the air with mechanical precision. By 1940, as German bombers swept over Britain, the world watched in awe and fear. The Battle of Britain was the first great air campaign in history. Thousands of aircraft dueling across the Channel in daily waves. Though the Luftwaffe ultimately failed to crush the Royal Air Force, their skill and engineering superiority remained unquestioned. German pilots were elite, their training rigorous. Their aircraft, the Bf-109 and later the Focke-Wulf 190, were masterpieces of wartime design. Across the Atlantic, America was watching and learning. In 1941, the United States entered the war with courage, but not with the best planes. The early U.S. fighters, the P-40 Warhawk, P-39 Airacobra, and P-38 Lightning, had strengths but also fatal flaws. They lacked the range to escort bombers deep into Europe. American air crews could bomb German cities, but they could not survive the return trip without horrific losses. Every mission was a gamble. The 8th Air Force called it flying into hell. From bases in England, formations of B-17 flying fortresses took off for daylight raids on industrial targets, the heart of Hitler's war machine. They flew in tight formations, trusting in defensive gun turrets and courage. But without long-range escorts, they were sitting ducks once they crossed into German airspace. The Luftwaffe waited like wolves. German fighters tore into bomber formations, ripping them apart before turning back home. Entire crews vanished in smoke and fire. On blackboards across England, mission rosters were erased, one by one, as aircraft failed to return. It wasn't that America lacked bravery. It lacked reach. The bombers could hit targets deep in Germany, but no Allied fighter had the fuel to escort them there and back. Pilots called it the empty sky, that long, lonely stretch, where the Mustangs were still a dream and the Messerschmitts hunted freely. By 1942, the situation had become unbearable. American generals demanded a solution, a fighter that could match the Germans in agility, speed, and climb, yet fly twice the distance. It sounded impossible. Engineers had been chasing that dream for years. But in the autumn of 1942, one British request would change everything. The Royal Air Force approached a small American company, the North American Aviation Corporation, and asked for a new fighter to fill their ranks. They wanted it fast. In a war where months could decide empires, there was no time for perfection. The design team, led by Edgar Schmood, worked around the clock. In just 102 days, they produced a prototype that would become legendary, the P-51 Mustang. Sleek, long-bodied, and radically aerodynamic, it was unlike anything in the sky. But its first models were far from perfect. The early Mustangs, powered by the American Allison engine, performed well at low altitude, but struggled in high-altitude combat where bomber escorts were needed most. The Luftwaffe still laughed, and yet beneath that slender frame lay potential, a design so ahead of its time that even its creators hadn't realized what they'd built. All it needed was the right heart. In the winter of 1942-43, British engineers fitted the Mustang with the legendary Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the same one that powered the Spitfire. The result was immediate and explosive. The aircraft transformed overnight from a modest low-altitude scout into a deadly, high-altitude killer. By the time the first P-51B Mustangs rolled into Allied squadrons, German pilots still joked about those American toys. They didn't yet understand that this machine was about to rewrite the rules of aerial warfare. The stage was set. The Luftwaffe still held the advantage: experience, numbers, and pride. But the Americans now had a weapon designed not only to fight, but to end the air war itself. And as 1943 drew to a close, the skies over Europe prepared for a transformation that would leave even Germany's most decorated aces in disbelief. By mid-1943, the air war over Europe had reached its deadliest phase. Every day, hundreds of American bombers lifted off from English fields, long silver lines glinting in the dawn, and headed east toward German factories, rail lines, and oil refineries. But the Luftwaffe's grip was still unbroken. For every successful bombing run, dozens of B-17s never came home. Entire crews vanished without a trace. The 8th Air Force began to call their missions milk runs to hell. Even with improved tactics, the cost was staggering. Over Schweinfurt and Regensburg, two key industrial cities, the Americans lost more than 60 bombers in a single day. That meant 600 men gone in a few hours. Most never recovered. The message was clear. Without a true long-range escort, daylight bombing could not continue. So in late 1943, the newly arrived P-51B Mustang was handed its first orders. Few pilots knew what to expect. They'd heard the British talk about this hybrid aircraft, half American frame, half British heart, but no one had yet tested it in the crucible of deep strike missions. The first Mustangs of the 354th Fighter Group, nicknamed Pioneer Mustang Group, took off from Boxted Airfield in England. When they returned, their reports stunned the command staff. The P-51 could fly faster, higher, and, most importantly, farther than anything before it. It could stay with the bombers from takeoff to target, and back again. Word spread quickly. Within weeks, bomber crews began recognizing the distinctive shape of the Mustang's laminar flow wings sliding into formation beside them. To the men in the fortresses, those sleek outlines meant one thing: hope. German pilots, however, dismissed the rumors. For years, the Luftwaffe had faced new Allied aircraft, each hailed as a game-changer, and each eventually shot down. To them, the Mustang was just another American experiment, another target. Some Luftwaffe officers even joked that its long range meant it would just run farther when frightened. But on December 13, 1943, over Kiel, laughter turned to disbelief. That day, Mustangs escorting B-17s encountered a formation of Messerschmitt Bf-109Gs. The Germans expected the usual outcome: a quick strike and withdrawal before the heavy escorts could react. But this time, the American fighters didn't fall behind. They climbed after them. The Merlin engine roared at full throttle, and the Mustangs held pursuit all the way to the top of the engagement. For the first time, the Luftwaffe's aces found themselves being hunted at 25,000 feet by aircraft that could not only match their climb, but outrun and outdive them. From that moment, the legend began. By early 1944, the P-51 was fully integrated into Allied operations. Its range reached nearly 1,600 kilometers with external tanks, enough to escort bombers deep into Germany, to Berlin itself. The Luftwaffe's network of radar stations soon began reporting a new kind of threat, one that appeared without warning, lingered above their intercept points, and vanished before response squadrons could climb to altitude. For German commanders like Adolf Galland and Hermann Göring, the reports were alarming. Göring, who once boasted that no enemy aircraft would ever fly over the Reich, was now hearing that American fighters were circling Berlin. His disbelief turned to fury. The technical reports told the same story. Luftwaffe analysts noted the Mustang's stability at high altitude, its fuel economy, and its exceptional turning radius. They discovered that, unlike most Allied fighters, the Mustang's laminar flow wing reduced drag by nearly 30%. That meant speed, but also endurance. One Luftwaffe engineer wrote in a secret report, "It is as if the Americans have found a way to bend the air itself." For German pilots, pride began to clash with panic. The Bf-109 and Fw-190 were still deadly machines, but they were now being forced into defensive fights, engagements they could not always control. For years they had dictated when to strike and when to break. The arrival of the Mustang erased that privilege. Still, the Luftwaffe refused to yield. Veteran aces like Walter Nowotny, Erich Hartmann, and Gerhard Barkhorn continued to rack up kills, flying missions in bitter conditions, often outnumbered but never outmatched in skill. Yet even they admitted privately that the skies no longer belonged entirely to Germany. By the start of 1944, Allied air power had reached a turning point. The Mustang gave America what it had long lacked: reach, protection, and dominance. The bombers could now strike deeper, longer, and return alive. And as spring approached, the air war that had once been ruled by the Luftwaffe was about to tilt irrevocably toward the Allies. The coming months would see the most intense air battles of the war, a contest not of numbers, but of endurance and innovation. It was here, over the burning industrial cities of Germany, that the laughter finally stopped. The Germans would soon learn what the P-51 Mustang truly was: not a toy, but a hunter forged for victory. The human angle, the men who flew them. Every war machine is only as great as the human heart behind its controls. In the winter of 1943, young American pilots began climbing into the cockpits of a plane they barely knew. Many had never flown combat. They were farm boys, factory workers, and students who'd been molded by months of relentless training. Now sitting inside the narrow metal shell of a P-51, they were about to change history. Each pilot knew his aircraft was different. The cockpit was clean, visibility near perfect, a bubble canopy giving them a wide, open view of the battlefield. Beneath them, the Merlin engine purred with quiet promise, waiting to roar. And when they pushed the throttle forward, the Mustang leapt like a living thing. For the first time, American flyers felt they could take the fight to the enemy and survive it. They no longer had to circle helplessly over retreating bombers. They could chase the attackers, climb, strike, and escort all the way home. But this new advantage came at a price. The P-51's range meant that pilots often flew 8-hour missions, much of it over enemy territory. Exhaustion, frostbite, and fear were constant companions. The oxygen masks left ice around their faces. The radios crackled with voices that sometimes faded mid-sentence, a burst of static marking another loss. Even so, morale soared. Men who had once dreaded each dawn briefing now volunteered for missions. "With the Mustang," one pilot said, "you felt like you had a fighting chance." The technological angle, a machine. Ahead of its time to understand the P-51's revolution, you must see it as engineers did, not just as a fighter, but as an aerodynamic breakthrough. The Mustang's magic wasn't luck. It was science pushed to the edge of wartime desperation. Its laminar flow wing, developed at the NACA laboratories, was the first of its kind in combat. Traditional aircraft wings caused heavy drag at high speed. The Mustang's design allowed smoother airflow, cutting drag dramatically. It sliced through the air rather than wrestling with it. This gave it speed, range, and efficiency unmatched in 1943. Then came the Merlin engine, Britain's masterpiece, refined through years of Spitfire combat. When paired with the Mustang's sleek frame, it turned the aircraft into a predator. At 25,000 feet, the Merlin supercharger maintained power where other engines gasped. The Mustang could climb faster, stay longer, and still have fuel to fight on the way home. Its design also favored endurance. External drop tanks under the wings extended its range far beyond the Luftwaffe's expectation. A P-51 could now escort bombers from England to Berlin and back, nearly 1,600 kilometers, a feat unthinkable a year earlier, in an era when most aircraft were designed for specific missions: interceptors, bombers, scouts. The Mustang blurred the line. It could escort, dogfight, strafe, and even dive bomb. It was not just a fighter. It was a multi-role weapon before that term even existed. German engineers, upon examining captured wrecks, admitted the craftsmanship was extraordinary. The precision of its rivets, the balance of its controls, and the smoothness of its aerodynamic skin reflected an industrial capability few nations could match. The irony was painful. A design born from an Anglo-American partnership would become the weapon that turned Germany's own skies against it. The strategic angle, redefining the air war before the Mustang. Allied bombing strategy was crippled by fear. Commanders wanted to destroy Germany's war industry, but without escort protection, the cost was unbearable. The arrival of the P-51 changed that calculus overnight. With Mustang squadrons leading the way, American generals implemented a brutal new doctrine: fighter sweep missions. Instead of waiting for bombers to be attacked, P-51s now roamed ahead, hunting the Luftwaffe before it could reach the formations. Entire waves of German interceptors were ambushed over their own airfields. Hangars burned, fuel depots exploded, and the Luftwaffe's veteran pool began to shrink. For the first time, the hunters became the hunted. The psychological impact was immense. Luftwaffe pilots, once masters of the sky, began flying with caution. They limited engagements, avoided deep pursuits, and spent more time defending than attacking. Göring's proud fighter arm, once feared across Europe, was being ground down mission by mission. The Allies finally possessed what strategists called air supremacy. The bombers could now hit German ball-bearing plants, synthetic fuel facilities, and communication hubs without catastrophic losses. Each successful raid starved the Reich of the resources it needed to build tanks, planes, and ammunition. It was not just a tactical victory. It was economic warfare from above. And yet, beneath every triumph, a shadow remained. Even as the P-51 turned the tide, its pilots faced a growing respect for the enemy they once mocked. The Germans, though outnumbered, fought with incredible skill and courage. Every dogfight was a duel of human will, not merely of machines. The Mustang might win the battle, but the men flying them knew that every victory came at the cost of another crew, another story cut short in smoke and flame. 4. The enemy's perspective. Pride meets reality. To the Luftwaffe, arrogance had once been armor. In 1939, their pilots were Europe's elite, men who had flown from the skies of Spain to the steppes of Russia, shattering enemy after enemy. They had grown up believing that German engineering could never be surpassed. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 was their sword, the Focke-Wulf 190 their shield. Together, they had dominated every front. Then came the Mustang. At first, German intelligence dismissed the new fighter as a Spitfire imitation. Reports from the front described its long wings, unfamiliar tail, and improbable range. Most commanders refused to believe it could escort bombers from Britain to Berlin. "The Americans exaggerate," one officer wrote. "Physics does not bend to propaganda." But the evidence soon became undeniable. By early 1944, Luftwaffe squadrons scrambled to intercept raids over Leipzig and Regensburg, and found Mustangs waiting before the bombers arrived. Dogfights that once began on German terms now began on American ones. The shock was not just tactical, it was psychological. The P-51 was faster, climbed higher, and seemed to appear from nowhere. Pilots who once mocked it began to whisper its name in the mess halls. The word Mustang carried a new weight, a mixture of fear and respect. Veteran German ace Adolf Galland later admitted, "The day the Mustangs first escorted bombers to Berlin, I knew the war was lost. the Luftwaffe tried to adapt, with new tactics, new aircraft like the Me-262 jet, and desperate training programs. But time had run out. Fuel shortages, inexperience among new recruits, and relentless Allied raids crippled their ability to recover. The skies that once belonged to the Reich were now filled with silver-winged shadows they could neither outfly nor outfight. The laughter that began in 1943 had turned, by 1944, into silence. The moral angle, the weight of power. For the men flying the P-51, victory was not pure triumph. Each mission carried moral gravity. The same range that allowed them to save bomber crews also enabled them to strafe enemy trains, airfields, and convoys deep behind lines. In the gun camera footage that historians study today, we see a grim truth. Every technological advance brings a heavier human cost. Mustang pilots often returned to base in silence. They had seen the flash of their guns destroy locomotives, fuel trucks, and sometimes, by cruel chance, civilians caught in the chaos. The joy of success mixed with guilt and exhaustion. "You couldn't celebrate too loudly," one veteran recalled. "You'd lost friends that morning." On the German side, young recruits barely out of training schools were thrown into cockpits against seasoned American squadrons. Many never returned from their first sortie. The war in the air had become a machine that consumed both sides, a storm of metal, speed, and fire where bravery often mattered less than numbers and endurance. As the Mustangs grew in number, the imbalance became overwhelming. Entire Luftwaffe formations were erased in weeks. The sky, once a symbol of national pride, had become a graveyard. In that sense, the P-51 was more than a weapon. It was a mirror held up to human ambition. It showed both the height of what men could create and the depth of what war demanded in return. The symbolic angle, the Mustang as a turning point. By 1944, the P-51 Mustang had become an icon, not only of American industry, but of Allied unity and technological evolution. It was built in California, powered by a British engine, flown by men from across the free world. In its aluminum skin, the very concept of cooperation had taken physical form. It symbolized a shift in warfare itself. The Mustang's success proved that design intelligence could defeat sheer experience. It marked the dawn of modern air strategy, the understanding that range, fuel, and endurance mattered as much as speed or firepower. It also embodied the paradox of progress. Human ingenuity had created a machine so perfect it seemed alive, yet its purpose was destruction. Every curve of its wing, every glint of polished metal, served to end lives faster. The same principles that gave it grace also made it lethal. And still, there was beauty in it. Even German pilots admitted its aesthetic perfection. "A predator shaped by the wind," one said after capture. For them, the Mustang represented not humiliation, but the inevitability of evolution. They had once ruled the sky. Now they were witnessing its next chapter. As Allied bombers began to fly unchallenged over Germany's heartland, the P-51 became more than an aircraft. It was a herald of the end, proof that industrial might, when guided by innovation, could rewrite the balance of a world war. By the spring of 1944, both sides understood one thing clearly. The air war was no longer about who could fly faster. It was about who could adapt faster. And in that race, the Mustang had no equal. March 1944. The skies over Germany burned every day. From dawn until dusk, the thunder of engines filled the air above the Reich. American bombers, thousands strong, moved in endless streams toward Berlin, Leipzig, and Brunswick. Each raid was a statement. The Allies would no longer strike the edges. They would go for the heart. At 20,000 feet, the horizon shimmered with vapor trails, endless white scars stretching west to east. Beneath them, on every airfield from Hanover to Munich, the Luftwaffe scrambled. Mechanics ran across frozen concrete. Pilots slammed canopies shut. Propellers screamed to life. Among them, men who had once been legends, veterans of the Battle of Britain and the Eastern Front, prepared to fight a new kind of enemy. But something was different now. When they reached altitude, the sky was no longer empty ahead of the bombers. It was filled with Mustangs. The first clash. Over Berlin, on March 4, 1944, American bombers launched their first daylight raid on Berlin, the symbolic center of Nazi power. Göring had sworn it would never happen. "If a single enemy plane ever reaches Berlin," he once boasted, "you can call me Meyer." That morning, hundreds of B-17s crossed into Germany with a curtain of P-51s above and beside them. The Luftwaffe threw everything it had, over 300 fighters, into the defense. The battle that followed was chaos in motion. Contrails twisted into spirals as Mustangs dove through the German formations. The Merlin engines screamed, the sky filled with tracer lines. Green from the Germans, red from the Americans. For the first time, the Luftwaffe found its energy drained not by lack of courage, but by lack of oxygen. They simply couldn't climb or maneuver fast enough. The Mustang's supercharged engine kept its power even above 25,000 feet, where German engines began to fade. In less than an hour, dozens of Messerschmitts were downed. American bomber crews, looking out from their gun turrets, saw something they had never seen before: enemy fighters turning away. The raid succeeded. Bombs fell on Berlin's industrial districts, on railway yards and assembly plants once considered untouchable. Göring's boast died that day in the smoke above his own capital. Operation Argument. Big Week. The Berlin raid was only the beginning. In February 1944, the Allies had already launched a brutal campaign codenamed Operation Argument, later known simply as Big Week. Its purpose was not to destroy factories alone, but to destroy the Luftwaffe itself. For 6 consecutive days, American and British bombers attacked every major aircraft production site in Germany: Leipzig, Gotha, Regensburg, Schweinfurt. The Mustang's arrival made it possible. German defenses fought with desperation. Entire squadrons of Bf-109s and Fw-190s were thrown into the sky, wave after wave. The airfields that had once launched victory after victory now launched sacrifice. Each day, the Luftwaffe lost more planes than it could replace. The Mustang squadrons, 4th, 352nd, 357th, and 354th, cut through the interceptors like a blade through smoke. They hunted individually, pursued stragglers to their bases, and strafed the runways as fuel trucks exploded behind hangars. By the end of Big Week, the Luftwaffe had lost nearly 500 fighters and hundreds of its most experienced aces. What the Allies had done in 6 days could not be undone in 6 months. German factories still produced new planes, but now they sat idle. There were no skilled pilots left to fly them. The shift of momentum. The victory was not just in numbers, but in rhythm. From that point onward, the Luftwaffe was forced onto defense. The Americans dictated the tempo, the altitude, the battleground. Every morning, Mustang formations would sweep across Central Europe before the bombers even appeared. German radar screens lit up with false targets, decoys, diversions, deliberate chaos. The Luftwaffe's command network, once admired for its precision, began to fracture. For the first time since 1939, Germany's air defense system was reacting rather than anticipating. And in aerial warfare, reaction is defeat. Even Göring himself admitted later, "We lost control of the skies not because of cowardice, but because the enemy could be everywhere." Everywhere. That was the Mustang's legacy. The human cost victory, however, was painted in blood. Allied losses remained heavy. Every mission cost lives. Many Mustang pilots never saw their 21st birthdays. They went up with confidence, sometimes even with excitement, and never returned. When the survivors landed back in England, the ground crews counted bullet holes, patched wings, and wiped soot from exhaust streaks. Some aircraft came home with the pilot dead, hands still locked on the controls. War had no mercy for heroes, yet the sense of purpose never faltered. The men knew what these sacrifices meant. Every bomber saved, every German fighter destroyed, every factory bombed brought the war's end closer. One pilot, writing in his journal after Big Week, put it simply, We are trading lives for years, ours for theirs. Every mission we finish shortens the war. It was this grim arithmetic that defined 1944, a year when the sky itself became the front line. By spring, the Mustang's shadow stretched across Europe. But its ultimate test was yet to come, a mission unlike any before, one that would determine the success of the greatest invasion in modern history. The invasion of Normandy, the road to D-Day. By May 1944, the Allied invasion of Europe was imminent. To succeed, the beaches of Normandy had to be shielded from German air power. Not for minutes, but for days. It was a challenge unlike any before, to create total control of the sky. General Dwight Eisenhower's planners knew that tanks and ships meant nothing if the Luftwaffe could strike the landing zones. The task of denying Germany the air was handed to the men of the 8th and 9th Air Forces, and to their silent guardians, the P-51 Mustangs. In the weeks before June 6th, the air above France became a hunting ground. Mustang squadrons roamed far beyond the beaches, striking railway lines, bridges, and fuel convoys. They attacked airfields at Orléans, Tours, and Caen, destroying aircraft before they ever left the ground. Villagers watched from forests as the silver plains swept low over the countryside, guns flashing, the roar echoing across fields of wheat. By early June, the Luftwaffe's Western defense network was crippled. Out of more than 1,500 German fighters stationed in France, fewer than 300 remained operational. When the first Allied paratroopers dropped into Normandy, the skies above them were almost empty, a silence bought by months of relentless Mustang patrols. June 6, 1944. The day of days at dawn, the greatest armada in history moved across the Channel. The air was thick with aircraft, C-47 transports, gliders, bombers, and fighters. Above them, like hawks protecting a flock, flew hundreds of Mustangs. Their orders were simple: let no German plane reach the beaches. From sunrise to sunset, the P-51s kept constant watch. Whenever radar detected an enemy scramble, the Mustangs intercepted. Near Rouen, a group of FW-190s tried to break through. They were met by the 352nd Fighter Group and destroyed within minutes. Over Caen, another formation of Bf-109s attempted to dive toward the ships. They never returned. By nightfall, the Allies had landed more than 150,000 troops, and not a single major Luftwaffe attack had reached the beaches. For the men on the ground, this invisible victory made all the difference. Soldiers later recalled looking up between artillery bursts and seeing silver shapes crossing the clouds, sunlight flashing off their wings. "Our angels," one infantryman called them. The Mustang had done more than fight. It had shielded an entire invasion. The final battles in the air after D-Day. The war moved fast. Allied troops broke through Normandy's hedgerows, and the air war followed them across France. The Mustangs became a constant presence, not just escorts but attackers. They flew low-level missions over retreating German convoys, their 6 Browning machine guns tearing through columns of trucks, tanks, and trains. Every bridge blown, every engine destroyed, slowed the Wehrmacht's retreat. The Luftwaffe tried to resist, but it was bleeding to death. Fuel shortages crippled every operation. In August 1944, an entire wing of Bf-109s was grounded near Paris. There simply wasn't enough gasoline to take off. New pilots arrived from flight schools with barely 20 hours of training. Against battle-hardened Mustang veterans, they stood little chance. In 1 week of fighting over France, Allied pilots claimed nearly 400 German aircraft, most before they had climbed past 5,000 feet. One captured German officer summed it up bitterly: "We are running out of air, not the air itself, but the right to use it." By September, as Paris was liberated and the Allies advanced toward Belgium, the Luftwaffe was effectively broken. The air war that had begun with German supremacy in 1939 ended with German pilots hiding their planes under camouflage nets. The long reach into Germany's heart. Even as Europe celebrated, the Mustang's mission was not over. From autumn 1944 onward, The P-51 became the spearhead of strategic bombing deep inside Germany. The aircraft now carried drop tanks and could stay aloft for 7 hours, long enough to escort bombers from Britain to Poland and back. They attacked oil refineries at Luna and Mersburg, assembly lines at Kassel, and rail hubs at Dresden. Each strike weakened the Reich's last resources. Without fuel, the remaining German jets and bombers were grounded permanently. In the winter of 1944-45, when the Ardennes offensive threatened to push the Allies back, it was the Mustang that helped stop it. Flying in blizzards and fog, the 354th and 363rd Groups strafed roads clogged with German armor. By destroying supply columns, they starved the offensive before it could reach full strength. When spring came, the Allied armies crossed the Rhine under skies patrolled by Mustangs. The Luftwaffe, once feared across continents, had ceased to exist. The moment of realization. As the Third Reich collapsed, even its leaders understood what had happened. Göring reportedly told his staff in April 1945, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew we had lost the war." He was right. The P-51 Mustang had done more than escort bombers. It had made Germany's defeat inevitable. By granting the Allies absolute control of the air, it opened the door for every victory that followed on the ground. The skies that once echoed with Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs now belonged to a new generation of pilots, young Americans, who had learned to trust a machine once mocked as fragile. And in that transformation lay the story of an entire war. The rise and fall of empires measured not just in miles of land, but in miles of sky. The Mustang's dominance would now lead directly into the war's aftermath, the consequences for both nations, the birth of post-war aviation, and the lasting mark this aircraft left on history. When the guns finally fell silent over Europe in May 1945, the sky itself felt different. For 6 years it had been a battlefield, a place of fire and vapor trails, of courage and death suspended between clouds. Now it was empty again, but the silence carried meaning. The Luftwaffe, once the pride of Germany, lay in ruins. Its bases were shattered, its aircraft burned or abandoned in muddy fields. Of nearly 30,000 operational fighters built in the final 2 years of the war, fewer than 1,000 remained intact. Most had been destroyed on the ground, victims not of bombs, but of the relentless Mustangs that roamed overhead. The numbers told the story more clearly than any headline. In 1944 alone, Allied fighter squadrons claimed more than 5,000 German aircraft. Mustang pilots accounted for the majority of those kills. In the European theater, the P-51 achieved an unprecedented kill ratio, nearly 11-1 against the Luftwaffe's finest. Even the legendary German aces, men like Erich Hartmann and Gerhard Barkhorn, could not stem the tide. They fought bravely, but the conditions had changed. The Luftwaffe no longer owned the initiative. They flew when fuel allowed, against an enemy that could appear anywhere, anytime. It was the slow death of air power by exhaustion. For the Allies, victory in the air came at a cost beyond statistics. More than 4,900 Mustang pilots never returned from their missions. Each loss represented a young man who had flown too far, too high, into the heart of a war few fully understood. The bombers they protected lost tens of thousands more. Yet together, their endurance bought Europe's liberation. By controlling the skies, the Allies had controlled the war itself. With the Luftwaffe broken, German cities were left exposed. Strategic bombers reduced the Third Reich's industrial centers to rubble, a grim necessity that hastened the end but scarred generations to come. When Germany surrendered, many captured Luftwaffe officers were stunned by the scope of the Allied air fleet. Some had not seen a functioning German factory in months. Others wept openly as they walked through Allied bases filled with rows of gleaming Mustangs, hundreds of them, each one meticulously maintained, each one proof of an industrial scale Germany could no longer match. One German engineer wrote later in his diary, "We were defeated not only by pilots, but by production lines. Their machines never stopped." A new era takes flight as peace returned. The P-51 Mustang quickly became a symbol of triumph. not of conquest, but of endurance. It remained in service for years after the war, flying across Asia, the Middle East, and even into the early days of the Cold War. In Korea, Mustangs once again took to the sky, this time facing jet aircraft, yet still earning respect for their agility and reliability. In museums and air shows today, when a surviving Mustang engine starts and the Merlin's deep, rolling growl echoes, people still turn their heads. That sound carries the memory of a time when the fate of nations was decided in the air. Technically, the Mustang changed everything. Its design became the blueprint for post-war jet fighters. Aerodynamic efficiency, range, and fuel economy became as important as speed. Its success proved that victory belonged not to the loudest or heaviest machine, but to the smartest design. Strategically, it forced every military to rewrite its doctrine. Never again would bombers fly without escort. Never again would a nation assume that technology alone could guarantee superiority. Because the Mustang had shown that cooperation, adaptation, and persistence were equally decisive. For pilots, it left a more personal legacy. Those who survived remembered the Mustang not just as a tool of war, but as a companion. Loyal, responsive, alive. Many called it the airplane that saved my life more than once. And for the world, it became a lesson written in aluminum and flame, that innovation, courage, and unity could overcome even the most powerful enemy. The legacy in the skies. In the years after 1945, the P-51 Mustang did not fade away. It continued to fly across nations that had once fought each other. Former enemies studied it, engineers dismantled it, and young aviators idolized it. The aircraft that ended Germany's reign in the air became the foundation for peacetime aviation. In Britain, it was remembered with affection, a symbol of how American industry and British engineering could achieve greatness together. In the United States, it became the very image of the good war, sleek, righteous, unstoppable. Every air show that followed the war featured at least one Mustang, its silver body glinting against the blue, the deep hum of its Merlin engine a living heartbeat of history. But beyond its technical glory, the P-51 carried something deeper, human memory. Veterans who returned home would speak of its sound, its smell, its feel. They remembered the way it shook on takeoff, the steady vibration of its controls, the smell of fuel and oil mixing with cold morning air. To them, it was not a machine, but a companion, a loyal partner that had carried them through the darkest hours of their youth. The Mustang and the men who remembered. As decades passed, reunions of wartime squadrons often began the same way. A silence broken by the distant rumble of a starting Merlin. Old men would lift their eyes, some with tears they could no longer hide. The sound was unmistakable, deep, steady, and noble. It transported them instantly back to the frozen skies of 1944. To the pilots, the Mustang represented survival. To the world, it became a symbol of freedom preserved. In post-war Europe, children who had once watched them streak overhead now saw them as emblems of liberation. In the 1950s, Hollywood films turned the Mustang into legend. Sleek, defiant, bathed in sunlight as the narrator's voice recalled the bravery of the boys who flew her. The aircraft became shorthand for victory, innovation, and sacrifice all at once. Yet even those who never flew one could feel its presence. Every photograph, black and white, grainy, and streaked with smoke, told the same story: that courage could take shape, that progress could have wings. The cultural symbol by the turn of the 21st century, fewer than 200 Mustangs remained airworthy. Each one became a relic, maintained with reverence by collectors and museums. But to historians and viewers alike, the plane still speaks louder than any speech or monument. It represents more than a chapter of the Second World War. It represents the moment when humanity's creativity overcame its own destruction. The Mustang is often called the most beautiful fighter ever built. Beauty, in this case, was not vanity. It was purpose perfected. Every curve, every bolt, every note of the Merlin's roar was born of necessity, not pride. And perhaps that is why it endures. Even today, its silhouette appears on posters, flight suits, and emblems. The name Mustang itself became a symbol of freedom so powerful that it would later inspire cars, movies, and art, a reminder that speed and spirit, when guided by discipline, can achieve greatness. It was never just a weapon. It was a statement that even in the ugliest war, something could emerge that embodied the best of what humans could build. From war to wisdom, in the twilight of their lives, surviving Mustang pilots often repeated the same reflection. We didn't win because we were better men. We won because we learned faster. That was the essence of the P-51 story. Adaptation, intelligence, and resilience. It proved that technology alone could not win a war. It was the will to refine, cooperate, and believe that did. And in that truth, the Mustang transcended its era. It became not just a plane of the Second World War, but a timeless metaphor for progress, for how courage and design, when fused together, can defend what is right. As one historian wrote, "If the Spitfire saved Britain, the Mustang saved Europe." The time had come, then, not to celebrate war, but to reflect on what it had taught. And that reflection, calm, solemn, and lasting, is where our story ends. The roar of engines has long faded now. The pilots are gone, the airfields silent, the contrails dissolved into history. But the legacy of the P-51 Mustang still hums softly in the collective memory of humankind, a sound that belongs not to war anymore, but to remembrance. What made the Mustang extraordinary was not just its speed or beauty, but what it represented. It was the proof that innovation could turn the tide of destruction. Born from urgency, shaped by collaboration, it stood as the rare creation that united science, courage, and hope. Its silver wings carried not only bullets and fuel, but the invisible weight of every nation that longed for peace. Each mission flown, each bomber saved, each pilot who returned home alive. These were acts of defiance against the darkness of their age. When historians look back, they see more than a machine. They see a philosophy, that progress must serve humanity, not destroy it. The Mustang story reminds us that our greatest power lies not in domination, but in understanding, not in fear, but in the ability to rise higher after every fall. Today, when a restored Mustang lifts off from a modern runway, the crowd still falls silent. The sound of its engine carries across time, deep, warm, unyielding, echoing over those who built it, flew it, and never came back. It is a sound of courage preserved in metal and memory. And in that sound, there's a quiet promise that even from the worst of wars, beauty and meaning can endure. The P-51 Mustang was more than a fighter. It was a bridge between despair and hope, between destruction and rebirth, a symbol of how far humanity can go when it learns not only to fight, but to fly. If this story moved you, take a moment to like the video and subscribe for more untold World War II documentaries. Tell us in the comments which country you're watching from. Every voice keeps history alive.